I've been waiting all day for this. Baron, my handsome man. Hi, human. Hey, babe. You ready? All right, let's roll it.
Well, hi everyone. Welcome back to Soul Sense, where I've been named the official host for this episode, but not actually. Everybody who doesn't know Ashley, meet Ashley, and I'm the guest today, Anne. And
we're sitting this closely because we also live together. So I feel like sometimes you need to give like little COVID backstory.
It's like a things we say now COVID disclaimer, like not against the rules because we're housemates.
Because then you get like 18 mad emails about like, breaking protocol or whatever that is. So welcome. I'm really excited actually. I feel like we have a bit of a treat in getting to chat with Anne today because for those of you who don't know Anne, she is like all the things on the back end, admin, and she's our tech support, and she does all of the intakes with our online teachers, educators, which is really great. So, which all of you can put the face to the name because you're always on Zoom calls together and doing that kind of thing. So Anne does all the magic stuff, which is really cool. And what
you do all the magic.
I mean, I think we both think that.
I do the paperwork. She does the magic stuff.
The paperwork to me is like, it's like so stressful. But we wanted to have a conversation today because sometimes we get into these conversations together. We have a workspace, and one of the things that came up last week that we thought actually perhaps needed a bit of a platform to talk about, because it can be an uncomfortable conversation, but it's a conversation surrounding judgment and judgments. And a quick little backstory, I'm not really sure what we were talking about last week. I mentioned a human being that I just have such an admiration for, because they really are just straightforward. It's no fucking bullshit. There really is no judgment. It's a no judgment, bias-free space to land. And so the reason that I brought the conversation up to Anne was I said, I was talking about this person, and your response was?
I had like a confessional moment where I was like, dude, I still have so much judgment all the time, and I'm aware of it, and I catch myself after the fact, but my reflex is still a critical thought that maybe necessarily doesn't contribute to formulating a valid opinion about a human being. And so I had this confessional moment, and we got into what a judgment versus,
or just what, first off, before we even get into the verses, what is a judgment to you? What is that? How would you define? You can give us a specific example, maybe an anonymous example of just like a situation, or how you would define judgment. What would that be for you?
I really do think of it as like, is it a scientific observation, or does it have a connotation with a bias attached to it? So what I'm talking about isn't you're wearing a plaid shirt. What I'm talking about is fly red plaid shirt. And then I'm like, why? Why does it matter? Who cares? It's none of your, first of all, none of your business. Second of all, it doesn't change anything about what your final opinion of the human being is, but it's a thought that has something attached to it and it's not necessarily negative. Sometimes it's like a really positive thing, but it's still a thing that comes from,
like, damn, that girl works out, like something like that.
Maybe, yeah.
Could that be like a snap judgment, though?
It could be like totally a snap judgment, but it's a thing that I still do, and there are pieces of me that does it in a like actual animal instinct, like I'm observing this person and I'm consciously formulating an opinion, but then there's this piece of me that I think has been programmed in, and I'm working really hard to unprogram, that still has one of those like shitty judgment moments where I'm like, and I do it to myself too, which is the other big thing. And that's where I abuse it the most, is when I walk past like a mirror or something and I'm like, girl, your hair, what's happening? And then I'm like, why? Why do you care? Why do you care? No one's seen you in like 4 days. Actually, why do you care? And why do you care if anyone's seen you? And it's just these little loops that I go through.
Okay.
And I'm still, because I live in this all accepting world and I really do want to be fully judgment free, there's a piece of me that still connects with it because there's like a safety component, you know, there's always that piece of you that's like judging the person at the end of the dark alley because there's like that need for it almost. And then I find that trickling into situations where there is no danger and I'm like, you need to kill that. And so it's that hard flux.
I want to unpack this with you, and there's a few things I think when I don't think often that you, and I'll just speak personally to you and not in broad strokes for anyone else, just really within. So with you, when judgment is only really tough for you when it has a negative connection to it. Almost could you say that with your judgment sometimes it's almost like a stigma maybe that goes with the person or something else that goes along with it? Like could some of your judgments come based off of stigmas, like the way people think about humans with tattoos? Because like we all know that they're criminals, they're pirates, or potential sex workers of some kind, right? Isn't that true? No, right, that's not. It's like a weird stigma, but sometimes could come with a judgment from someone. So is it fair to say that you only feel judgment is poor when it comes from a negative place?
I think, no, not at all. I think that any form of judgment that comes with a preconceived bias should be reconsidered. For example, I'm not even talking about, you know, huge stigmatized biases that exist within, you know, like our culture and our systems and like people en masse that have these stigmatized connotations of, you know, features or qualities or select groups. I'm even talking about like, if I have history and I bring that bias to a new situation, that's a judgment I need to consider because it's making a false representation of what I'm looking at. And so there's a piece of me that's like, question all of judgment, even if it is that I love people who wear glasses because my favorite kindergarten teacher wore glasses. I could be looking at the worst human being on the planet wearing glasses and kind of be like, oh, hi, oh my goodness.
And you like that.
And that's a dangerous thing. So there's a piece of me that's like, kill all judgment. Everything must be factual for each unique situation, but then there's a huge instinctual component that lets this piece of me survive because it's how predators and prey have interacted forever, right? Like who can make the judgment first and who can react to it first is who survives. If a prey can detect danger before danger can do anything about it, it survives. So there's a huge animal component of us, I think, as human beings that says, tick, 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 here's what I'm looking at. What does this mean? Is it dangerous? And do I need to move? Or is it safe to stay? And so it overlaps in a ton of really confusing ways. And it's finding that line where it's like, this is an appropriate judgment because your life may depend on it.
Right.
Or you're just making a judgment because your brain's been programmed this way and you need to stop because this human being or this thing or this activity or whatever it is that you're casting judgment upon is new and therefore deserves none of your preconceived notions.
So then you could think about it in two different ways, because I do see judgment as something that we do as creatures, and we do it for a lot of different reasons. Maybe we've done it for survival in some ways. Maybe we've done it because it really was coming from a negative place or a positive place, or we did it to like fit in with a group of people when we were growing up, or somehow it's been like embedded in what we've been doing. But I think it does come from a preconceived notion of something. Then I do think that there's typifying, which is the big thing that we kind of threw at you the other week, was something that Anne hadn't been exposed to, was the idea of typifying, which is really just categorizing a place or a person or a situation and then letting that thought go. But we're sort of like dialed and tuned in, or we have been to recognize those things, right? And I think typifying is also one of those things that then connects to that instinctual survival piece that you're talking about, is you're typifying a situation without judgment or without like a bias or that kind of thing that goes along with it. Typifying is maybe just recognizing the situation and then trusting that instinct or that piece that we have to spin off of it even farther. Does that am I making sense? Without
Googling it.
We're Googling it to find out. So I think that that's really the difference. I think we naturally typify people, situations, places, different things like that. Give it to us.
Typify. Represent, symbolize, be characteristic, or representative example of.
Does that, so I think that if you think about it that way, we all naturally do that. And I think we can do that without there being anything else attached to it. Whereas a judgment, I think there's something attached to it, whether we're judging someone because we're being hard on ourselves, whether we're judging someone to make ourselves feel better, whether we're judging a situation because we think we know the assumed outcome of it based on past situations or experiences, things like that. Whereas typifying is just recognizing what kind of category that may fall in. Not saying that it should falling in a category at all needs to happen, but it's just kind of that natural instinct of the thing that we do. And then why did that change for you how you felt about yourself judging things? Because I don't think I think you are judging things sometimes, but I don't think all the time you're judging things. But the reason that I think this is important for you and many other people is sometimes when we pass a judgment, we then beat ourselves up for passing a judgment because that's not the kind of person that we want to be. And then we get into this loop of like, well, why, which can cause all of these other things, when really if we could just distinguish between whether it was a typification of something or an actual judgment, then we can dig in or not to where that needs to go.
I like that. So, and the reason I like that is because this is how my brain works, is typification would allow you to do that kind of analytical stack up and then release it as not dangerous and therefore irrelevant. And so you still have the ability to draw conclusions when enough of the dots connect, when enough of a stack builds up that you're like, whoa, this is dangerously typified as a situation I don't want to be in, then it allows you to make that judgment, evaluate, and assess. But if you're constantly typifying and then constantly releasing those typifications because there is no judgment necessary, then what a beautiful way to keep the instincts in check and continue to evolve as a human being who doesn't necessarily attach judgment to observations or situations or people, which is wonderful because I think so much of what we experience today, so many people's struggles and I think things that we all deal with as human beings is this phase of judgment that we all move through, and at some time or another everyone's been judgmental of someone else, themselves, the situation. Like it's happened to everyone, and no matter what journey or part of that journey that you're on where you're realizing, like, okay, I don't want to be this kind of judgment, or I do, you're becoming more unique in it, you're recognizing what judgment maybe came from family or maybe came from childhood, and I think we all have to transition through it. So I like this step of that transition because it does recognize that you don't have to shame yourself for having any form of judgment or any form of typification, as long as you're not acting and holding and building upon the ones that you really should be just releasing.
Right? Releasing and then really tearing into the ones that maybe you don't, because that self-awareness is also huge. If you're having a judgment on yourself, which we're the hardest people in the world to ourselves, if we're having a judgment on ourselves or somebody else, what does that mean for us, right? Because again, that's just a projection of how we're feeling here. And then we need to bring in that self-awareness where we need to start digging into that a little bit. You're also a bit of a unique breed, and you'll hear her talk a lot about her like survival instincts and stuff, because she's one of the rare humans that I know that actually is In some situations, I'm going to say this really carefully, in some situations very intuitive to her surroundings and what's around her. When it comes to dealing with matters of her own heart and her own life, she's counterintuitive. So she should instinctually listen to what's coming from her gut and here, and she's constantly like, brain, step in, you can fix it. Brain, step in, you can fix it. And so if that makes sense, I think that's a good definition of you. But you mentioned instinct often, and here's one of those things that I think we also have to talk about it with self-awareness, is being in tune enough to know when our instinct and our gut is talking to us. Because ultimately we spend, right, like an example, so much time on these things that maybe perhaps another individual walking down the street attached into this isn't paying attention to the things around them to be able to typify or project or feel dangers or possible situations where they should just be a little bit more alert. Maybe it's a vehicle you should be watching for. Maybe it's a person you should be watching for. Maybe somebody else is about to embark on something that could, you know, cause harm to them in some way, but we're so tied up in this that we've like lost the instinct of everything around us. Whereas this human walking down the street really knows, like she knows where every exit is, and she's aware of you know, the people and where they are and to what distance they are and different things. So I think your instinct is very different, and I think that you're also a little bit hypersensitive with what you think is judgment versus typification, because you're always typifying your environment so that you can best prepare yourself for survival, whereas maybe other people aren't. Does that make sense? So I think one of the biggest problems that we need to tap into, or something else that I just think we need to be more aware of, is our instinct to like connect with ourselves and our judgments, and then also trying not to let this get in the way, right? This always gets in the way. We assume we think we know what's going to happen based on something else, whereas maybe this is telling us something different. Also, one of the things that Anne and I realize is that we are only sort of one tiny small thought bubble of, you know, opinion or experience or knowledge. And one thing that we really love doing is having uncomfortable conversations, and not just having conversations that are uncomfortable because we only think that it's the way that we feel it is. So if you feel a different perspective or point of view on it, then I welcome you to kind of help take us down that journey for a little bit so that we can just continue to grow as individuals in our lovely rants.
We are lifelong learners, and we love to be wrong. And please open up the conversation if you agree or if you disagree.
I love that. Yeah, I dig that. Thank you for, you know, just finally just getting in front of the screen with me.
I hope our rant made sense.
I think it will. There's some good stuff in there, even if you have to piece it together, which is often what I find us doing all the time, right? And our position is changing constantly based on knowledge that we're always getting, so.